welcome to the Demographics Decoded podcast with me, demographer Simon Kuestenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping our futures. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we had two shows where we have been diving into the demographic trends for 2025, predictions from Simon. And today we're going to unpack even more insights about how we're going to live, how we're going to work, how we're going to invest this year. And this is clearly valuable information if you're a business person, an investor, an entrepreneur, so that you can understand the changes that are going to occur, because 2025 is going to be a year of change. Well, that was an easy prediction because every year is. So, Simon, I look forward to hearing more of your thoughts for what's ahead for this year.
Absolutely. Good fun with these forecasts so far. And it's always nice to hear people coming back with their own comments about what they are forecasting. And
people love leaving the comments on the YouTube channel particularly. But yes, we've been growing our audience considerably over the last month since we've been running these. So, by the way, if you haven't listened to the previous two shows, if you're a new listener, or watcher on YouTube, please go back to previous shows once you've done this, not just the forecast episodes, but the others that Simon's given some great insights. And if you are getting benefit from it, can I please ask you a favour for this year? Could you please tell somebody else about the show so that we keep growing our audience to help pass the message on to as many people as possible? Now, Simon, what's your next forecast for 2025?
And I figured I'll go a bit out there, and I'm doing the dangerous bit where the demographer talks about economics, and I'm predicting an easing of inflation, meaning we'll see inflation numbers go back probably into the target range of the RBA, so that you will then go up. Finally, this is a bit safer now to cut interest rates. Yeah? So I'm part of the relatively big camp of people who thinks that there might be an interest rate cut, as we will have reached the inflation rate by probably somewhere around middle of this year or something, and we then lower interest rates.
Well, all the big banks are predicting interest rates to fall from May this year, and most of the economists are. The Reserve Bank is being a little bit cagey. Simon, I think they're doing that on purpose. They don't want to hint that interest rates are going to drop. They've got two ways of affecting inflation. One is the interest rates, but the other is the narrative. And if they already start hinting that's going to happen, it'll give people confidence to spend and have a negative effect, basically push up inflation again.
By you mean people, you mean the government wanting to spend more money?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because there's been lots of jobs created over the last year or two that have kept inflation and the economy ticking over, and most of them have been created by the government, haven't they?
Exactly. So we need to be a bit careful there. That's part of the reason, as we discussed last episodes, why unemployment is low and so forth. But yeah, that's definitely what we'll continue to see from the RBA, is they want to control the narrative and they want to show and hint at what is to be done. But even now, if we forecast something like there will be an interest rate cut by the middle of the year, I want people to be still a bit cautious about what this means. This means rates might drop a bit. This is not the ringing in of a new round of super low interest rates.
No.
That is not what it is. And again, this is the demographer adding to the interest rate development. What the coming decade will see is we see the biggest generation, that is millennials, moving to the highest spending phase of the life cycle. So they will spend every dollar they have. Baby boomers are not, as they move into retirement, turning into poor penny-pinching pensioners like previous generations have done. They're asset rich. They own the majority of cash savings. Boomers very happily spend money. So we have a decade of the biggest generation and the richest generation happily spending money. This is not an environment that cries out for super low interest rates. This is an environment that suggests that on average we will have higher interest rates than we would have seen last decade. I'm not saying there will not be a rate cut here or there. I'm actually very confident that there will be one in the middle of the year. But overall, don't be all so cute in trying to time your investments based on interest rates. I think ultimately, if you want to invest into something, if something needs to be purchased for your firm, just bite the bullet and do it. There is no super low interest rate environment just around the corner.
Well, the Reserve Bank uses interest rates as a way of controlling inflation, keeping unemployment in reasonable levels as well. And so For the decade before the pandemic, interest rates were lower than normal because it had difficulty keeping inflation up to the 2 or 3% band. Since the money was given away with very, very low interest rates over the pandemic, the Reserve Bank's been in the opposite position, trying to lower inflation by raising interest rates. So now it has to find that Goldilocks rate in the middle, Simon, doesn't it? Where it's not so low that it's inflationary, but not too high to be recessionary or depressing the economy. So I can see over the next year or two interest rates falling 3, maybe 4 times. So the Reserve Bank rate may drop 1% overall, 3 or 4 0.25% interest rate rises, nowhere near what it was prior to the pandemic, and definitely not at the wartime historically low rates. So you've got to make your plans based on slightly higher interest rates in the next decade than the previous decade. Again, I'm not an economist, but I've been a student of the economy for many years, and that's what I'm predicting moving forward.
Yeah, that sounds very, very feasible to me. And again, in forecasting as a demographer from this big picture perspective, I don't care so much if you're off, one rate cut here or there. It's the idea that the direction. We are always interested in the broad direction. The broad direction is relatively expensive money, not unaffordably expensive money, but relatively expensive money compared to what we've just gotten used to. And so just keep that as a broad direction.
Well, I think the other thing I got from the points you made a moment ago is that there are a number of factors that are going to underpin our economy. So while there's always going to be the negative Nellies and talking about downturns and recessions, and yes, we've had a per capita recession go on for a long time, so many of households are feeling challenges. You talked about the demographic trends of baby boomers having money to spend, having equity in their homes, being able to help their family members, their kids, their grandkids through the bank of mum and dad. And you've got the millennials entering the life stage where they're spending a lot of money. That, together with what we discussed last show, the tourism industry picking up, and the show before where we talked about education, all that's going to underpin Australia's economy moving forward, Simon.
Absolutely. So I'm not overly pessimistic about Australia's economy at all. Yeah, and we
Well,
discussed
actually,
it.
let's twist that round. It's not overly pessimistic at all. I think you're optimistic, aren't you?
I'm definitely optimistic here because the business model continues to deliver. The business model, we keep talking about it: mining, agriculture, tourism, international education. This is the only stuff we export that matters, and all of this has a strength in it. So the underlying system that creates wealth in Australia isn't changing. There's always discussions about how do we capture this wealth, how do we manage this wealth distribution, how much should we charge for stuff, who should be allowed to mine in our country, and so forth. These discussions are going to be had, but the underlying logic still means that the stuff that made us rich and wealthy, prosperous as a nation in the past continues to deliver in the future. So that's a good starting point. It rings as true for 2025 as it will ring true for 2035.
Interestingly, though, Australia doesn't operate in isolation. So we've had a couple of years of geopolitical disruptions, but maybe that's not unusual either.
No, and I would expect that this year geopolitically is going to be more shaky, another shaky year. So we just came out of years where we had, of course, you could see the pandemic as a geopolitical disruption. You could see a Ukraine war, a conflict in the Israel-Gaza as a disruption. We'll see more of this. And the reason I'm very confident about seeing more of this is that we have a global police force, which is the United States, that continues to withdraw from being the police force. Especially under Trump presidency, this is a world where the biggest country says, guys, you in Europe, you need to actually look after your own defense more. You now better pay up. So you see more military spending across all of Europe. All the while, this will lead to tighter budgets. This will lead to more political disruptions, meaning people on the left-hand, right-hand side of the spectrum pushing for, this is warmongering, there is military build-up across most of the world. There is global leaderlessness means you have more regional leaders that take over control. So there is a bit of stuff is going to be rejiggled, reshifted. That could lead to disruptions. The one thing that we want to avoid from an Australian perspective is trade. We benefit as long as stuff happily goes from one harbor to the next, because we export a lot of stuff. So as long as ships can happily go from A to B, that's good for us. But there will be more areas where this is not the case. So that's difficult. Is always the wild card with Trump that he will do things completely different, but he is an America First type politician who's not interested in playing the police force elsewhere. And so we'll need to figure out who secures the oceans that are of interest to us. Ultimately, though, I'd say we need to be optimistic because we want to remember that our trade partners, largely someone like Japan or most importantly, of course, China, need our products more than we need their stuff. We only get money from the Chinese, for example, whereas the Chinese get food and energy from us, stuff that is significantly more important than money. And so I would say that while we are the junior partner in a relationship, in most trade relationships, to be honest, we are ultimately there with a better leverage because we don't need it, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Well, at the end of last year, there were a number of changes geopolitically as well in France, in Syria, and as you say, the ongoing wars in the Middle East and Ukraine. So, yes, there'll be X factors every year. There's an X factor. Things you didn't even expect to occur will come out of the blue. Okay, back home, though, I see one of your predictions is a great year for certain industries. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and I picked 3 related type industries here that I'm very optimistic about. Indoor play centers, shopping centers, and childcare centers. The reason why I picked those is everything works in their favor. Let's start with indoor play centers. Indoor play centers, you pay a fee and your kid plays in a ball pit, in a trampoline type landscape. And they tend to have a cafe associated with it, and the parents sit there and work on their laptops or have a couple of chats with each other. Why are those things so popular? These weren't a mass phenomenon at the same scale when I was young. I'm 41, and this wasn't a thing when I was young. The reason they're taking up is space. Very few families, and of course the people who are sending their kids to those play centers now are millennial parents. These millennial parents overwhelmingly live in houses that are too small to host more than maybe one friend for a play date. So, and quite often not that. Quite often you have one parent working from home, so the play dates are disruptive, so to speak. So we say in urban planning parlor, we say we move an activity from the home to a third space. And so more of the child playing, socializing, physical play takes place in a third place.
The third place in my generation was the street.
Exactly.
The street is not safe anymore. People don't say, okay, go out and play in the street.
The hilarious thing is there that the streets and the playgrounds have gotten significantly safer compared to what they were in the past, but our perception changed. So there is the number of child abductions, for example, that is essentially non-existing. Occasionally you get a case or 2 per year and everybody reads about it, but ultimately this is much safer. Traffic deaths and whatever, much down. But we don't believe it anymore, so to speak, and so we mollycoddle our kids. It's part of the general saying that we over-supervise our kids in the real world and we under-supervise our kids on the online world narrative. And so in the real world, we are increasingly happy to just say, you guys play in this secure play center. Mom and dads are whatever, having coffees or working on their emails, and that's done. That's 3 hours well spent, and then we go home.
Shopping centres have changed too. They're not just places to shop now, but they're entertainment destinations.
Exactly. And of course, shopping centers benefit by the sheer fact of more people moving away from the inner city where you have whole shopping precincts, and they move to car-dependent areas. And if they want to do their shopping, yes, a larger share of the shopping is done online, but overwhelmingly, especially when we talk about a cohort that shops for bucket loads of clothing for their kids, that is easier done in a shopping center than it is online in many ways, with getting the sizing right and so forth. And of course, you combine this with the weekly grocery shop, so you put all of this into shopping centers. So shopping centers, very good decade ahead as millennials have making their very good 2 to 3 decades ahead, to be honest.
Well, that means you need the right sort of car to put everything in, and that's why more people are using SUVs. And that's something we're going to talk about in an upcoming show. I put you on notice on that a couple of shows ago, where we're going to actually have just a talk about where we drive, what we drive, how we drive. The selling is going to be different moving forward. So that's a future episode of the Demographics Decoded podcast. Something that's been in the news over the years has also been the gender pay gap. It's changed so much over the 40 years, 50 years I've been in the workforce. What's going to happen to the gender pay gap?
Yes, so it's one of those things that lots of people are super pessimistic about, and I love countering them with outrageous optimism. So the gender pay gap has long been shrinking. It has essentially evaporated for non-parents. So if you are non-parents, male, female, under the age of 50, there is no gender pay gap. Doesn't exist for non-parents. The gender pay gap at this stage is solely a primary carer pay gap. And it's true that child rearing responsibilities, primary care, largely lives with the women of Australia. So you go, oh, that's a bit academic. Overall, it's still a gender pay gap. You just rebranded it. And I'd say, don't be too certain about this, because the parallel development has been that more and more women have outperforming men in general. On every level of education, women significantly outperform men, not just a little bit, significantly. Education remains the best indicator for your future income. That means we see more and more couples where the woman is the higher income earner. That means when it comes time to return to work, which household will send the lower income worker back to the workforce? That is not how households function. Households ultimately are relatively pragmatic beasts. And so we will see more households where the woman returns at a fuller capacity than the man. Both people return to work, spoiler alert, but she will work for 5 days, he will go for 3 days. Or she will work 4, he'll work 3, whatever the individual arrangement is. But all of these things, these developments, further shift the gap between men and women there. And of course, to make this forecast even easier of the gender pay gap narrowing even further is we run a country where the majority of leaders very soon will be Gen X, a pragmatic cohort who is absolutely obsessed with gender equality. And of course, these Gen X people also then manage a workforce that is largely dominated by millennials and Gen Zs. You cannot treat men and women any differently anymore. So the gender pay gap narrowing also almost feels like a cheating kind of forecast to me, since it's absolutely guaranteed in my mind to improve.
And it's also good news. I'm happy about that. What I'm not happy about is your next forecast about mental health.
Exactly. So my next forecast says that Australia will record more mental health cases, more poor mental health cases, so to speak. We don't know, though, whether we should be optimistic or pessimistic about this. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? We don't know, will be forever the answer, because quite often mental health goes underreported. And first and foremost, reporting mental health tends to be a good step.
Yes.
Because it is finally linked. And we see a big difference in mental health.
Nowadays. It wasn't acceptable when I was young. Don't be such a sissy, don't complain, just grin and bear it. So it is good that more people are opening up, and the Are You OK days and things like that are great, because we're getting more lonely, aren't we, and as a society.
Exactly, and we now finally learned a language to talk about it. So that's part of it, is we acknowledge that this is a real thing. It's not just you being a softie or something. This is just you realizing that this can occur, and then it's something to be dealt with. This could be medication, this could be therapy, this could be, to a degree, it is just living with it and learning how to deal with it sometimes. But at least you know what's happening. And the reason why I'm absolutely certain that this will continue to go up is that we have very, very high reported rates of poor mental health in young people in their early 20s, particularly women. It then remains to be seen. So the current profile of poor mental health says that you have high profile of people with poor mental health in their 20s. It then significantly improves as you partner up, even though you say stuff like, my partner drives me crazy. They actually improve your mental health. Then you have kids. Again, you say stuff like, my kids drive me crazy. They massively improve your mental health. And then your kids make your mental health really good once they leave the house. And then actually your mental health gets super fantastic once you leave the workforce. Early retirement is the best you'll ever feel in your life from a mental health perspective. And then poor mental health starts to climb up again as your friends start dying, as you lose your sense of identity if it was linked to the work that you had. And of course, once your partner dies, mental health gets really bad, traditionally speaking. But so the question is, what does the 21-year-old woman, which is the person in Australia with the worst mental health on average, what does her mental health profile look like throughout the coming years? Will she have experienced mental health at the same rate as she pushes through the whole life cycle, or will it massively improve? The answer is it's going to be a mixture of both. But overall, it probably takes about 50 years worth of people living through this to actually catch up with the real status of actual mental health in this country. So for the next, I would say, probably 50 years, it's very easy to forecast that we will have more poor mental health cases. Unless, of course, there are certain kind of developments in Australia that would massively improve mental health. This would be something like an outrageous sense of optimism, essentially guaranteeing that you get richer every year, that your cost of living concerns will never be an issue, and so forth. But I don't see this happening anytime soon. So therefore, definitely we will see more poor mental health cases reported. So all types of corporate and public interventions trying to help people with poor mental health will be in high demand, and they will truly be doing great work.
Well, one of the much older than you changes I've seen in the way mental health is treated is, over the 70 years I've been alive, is talking about it more, but also how it's treated. Remember in the old days they used to have insane asylums where people were locked up because I guess it was because there wasn't the medication, and they used to have those straitjackets that they put them into. I'm not really sure what they use them for. The only way I see it now is magicians and illusionists using those straitjackets to see how Houdini used to do it, was locked up in a straitjacket that apparently they restrain people with mental health issues. So isn't it great that we have progressed and learned that it's something that is normal, because so many of us has it. It's on the spectrum of normal, and let's help people with that issue. And so please, if anyone is, occasionally people get offended when we discuss these topics, so please, we're not making fun of anybody with this. We're very aware of the issues that some people have in our own families as well. I've got a couple of nephews with some real mental health issues, and I'm really pleased that we can talk about it openly and there's abilities to help them.
Exactly, and this is also just gaining awareness, gaining understanding as a system, not just for individuals, but as a system. We know increasingly how to deal with these things, and this development will continue for the next couple of decades. Yeah, and so I think this is a big sense of achievement actually for society.
It is, isn't it? Very much so. Now, one of the things that's happened over the years is people have stopped smoking because there's been all the public health warnings about it. But wherever I go down the street, Simon, you see people standing outside with these little things that are vaping. I don't fully understand how different it is, but from what I know, it's probably just as harmful. It's just as harmful as smoking. Is that right?
Yes, and so the weirdest data and research about vapes was done, I think, 2 years ago in Australia, where they tested all 50-something or 70-something available vapes that are legally available on the Australian market, and tested them, and none of them had the ingredients in it that they were listed in the back. So this is
Really?
completely it's a shockingly under-regulated area, and the nice thing about smoking was that it only permanently, bit by bit, cigarette by cigarette, damaged your lungs. That's about it. And then you died of lung cancer.
Is that all? That's okay.
The neurological impacts weren't there, but with vapes, you actually inhale chemicals and gases, and lots of them have neurological impacts. It is an unknown. It is super dangerous. Of course, it has the terrible environmental impacts as well, since you have batteries, powered machines that you use for a very short time. Nobody disposes of them correctly. Also, of course, this is me showing my age, you don't even look cool with a vape. But the idea is, from a technological perspective, we say we solved smoking. Our anti-smoking campaigns in Australia are among the best the world has ever seen. This is
Really?
absolutely fantastic. We stopped smoking. For all intents and purposes, we got rid of it. We ensured that it is very expensive, so therefore that the harm that it did create, it paid for itself to fix. An ingenious campaign. Well done, Australia. Then, of course, what happens from the, let's call it the tobacco lobby, whatever, they faced a problem. Their product not being in demand anymore. And then they came up with innovation. Innovation was vaping, was essentially fruit flavored cigarettes that are consumed in a different way, but they still make money the same way. And what we're now seeing is regulation will follow innovation. That is always what happens. There is a kind of crazy Wild West period when an innovation enters a market. That was vaping in the last couple of years will increasingly be hemmed in. The fact that you smoke and you say it's healthy, it is laughable. I'm of course not a medical professional, so completely ignore my words on it, but look at medical journals on the issue. This is not a healthy thing to do by any means. You're of course free to do so, this is your own body, whatever, but don't complain about any neurological damage that you can do with this as well. It's not just stuff that you potentially, if there's tobacco, put into your lungs and so forth, but this is stuff that damages your brain. That's something that I would be significantly more cautious about. Also, whenever I see that a product that is free to purchase does not have the stuff in it that it lists on the back, that it's insane that they're still allowed, to be honest. But that's my old man rant over here. I am very much predicting that the war on vapes will continue, that we will bit by bit try to replicate the success of the anti-smoking campaigns to touch the vaping element as well.
Okay, a couple more predictions for 2025. This is the third of a series of three shows. Again, I mentioned it earlier, if you haven't listened to the previous ones and you're enjoying Simon's musings about what's ahead, and that's really important for you, especially if you're in business or you're an investor, so you know the trends that are going to happen, just go back to the old shows. And as I said before, subscribe to the show. And again, do us a favour and tell somebody about it. But two more predictions, please, Simon. One of them is about influencers.
Exactly. It's not about any type of influencers. It is about corporate influencers.
What do you mean by that, Simon?
Exactly. What are corporate influencers? You can see this more and more on LinkedIn, for example. Corporate influencers are people who essentially under their employer banner talk about the company. You have a couple of economists in Australia who provide this under their corporate AMP umbrella, who provide insights. We also see, for example, I'm doing a lot of mapping. History is the world's biggest mapping software. They have a guy called John Nelson who just does really nice videos explaining how the software works. These are corporate influencers. This is a way of not just educating people about the product, but also about the broader ecosystem that is associated with their product. So if a bank has their economists explain how the world works, that is, it's a subtle advertisement of their business. That's a corporate influencer. And we realize that this is much more important. It's much more powerful than just running a campaign that says bank with ANZ. It's a campaign that shows you have expertise linked in this thing. So you link the idea of expertise with your product, and we'll be seeing more of this. Also, bit of career advice. You could be the next corporate influencer for your employer if you happen to be the type of personality who enjoy this type of work. But I would say that's one of the developments that you will see an awful lot of on your LinkedIn in the couple of years.
Makes sense. At the moment, there are all those influencers on TikTok and X and Instagram. It actually doesn't take, well, the barrier of entry is very, very low. So be careful who you listen to, I guess, is the only advice I'd give to that. And one last prediction for 2025. What would you like to finish off with?
It's the idea that at least puts quite a few businesses into a positive mood, I hope, is that this will be a year of high consumption. So high consumption is linked, of course, with overall how rich do people feel, how much money do people have, but it is also linked to sheer demographics, because What we have in the coming year is the highest phase of the consumption life cycle is the mid-40s. That happens to be occupied by the biggest generation ever, by millennials. So that alone guarantees, generally speaking, high consumption. So all those Bed Bath & Beyonds, Barbecue Galores, Bunnings of this world, Harvey Normans, they will have a great year with having such a high chunk of the population, the highest spending phase of the life cycle. Of course, also we need to point to baby boomers who, while they leave the world of work, so far the data shows that they spend more money. They're very trigger happy with their credit cards, so they spend more money, and that's a development. If you sell stuff, if your business, your industry sells stuff, you have a very good year ahead because there are more people willing to buy that stuff.
And I guess they'll be in the position to do it. Well, Simon, thank you so much. That was a fantastic 3 episodes sharing what you believe is going to be ahead, but not just how we're heading. I think your and my intention was to help our listeners and our viewers prepare and thrive in this evolving landscape space, to take advantage of it. And that's why we're going to come back each week with a Demographics Decoded podcast, just to help you understand the trends shaping your future. And the future looks bright, Simon.
I remain ever the optimist, and I do believe that you are capable of better shaping your own future of your business, of your family, of your investments, for whatever it is, if you are able to gather more perspectives. And what we do here is we try to show you the demographic perspective. You bring your own perspective of whatever topic you look at anyways with you, and we just want to go, hey, throw the demographic perspective in the mix. Maybe you will then be a better investor, partner, volunteer, whatever it is.
Fantastic. Look forward to catching up with you next week, Simon.
Fantastic. See you soon.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kuestenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.